all right, party people in the place to be, vandals, and all the people who like to roast gummy bears on the campfire. This is the 250th episode of How'd We Get Here? Our show in general. We used to have a different branding, but like it's all the same. 250, and oh my God, do we have an extra special guest with us tonight? We're gonna go ahead and let him introduce himself. How are you doing today, sir? And how is life on Mars?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on. How are you two doing?
We're doing great, man.
Excellent.
Really good.
So for anyone that's not familiar, which you should be, we have Brandon Graham with us tonight. And so we're going to talk comics and who knows what else we'll dive into, but mainly probably comics mostly, but never know. For the type of show we have here, the reason why it's called what it's called is because we often go off on some tangents and makes for some interesting conversations.
Certainly, yeah, I'm good with tangents.
Definitely. So, dude, surviving on Mars is your newest project, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that like most of your work is pretty personal, but like this is probably the most personal thing you've put out, man. Like, what was the process on that, and like how raw of it was it to like actually put this shit to paper and like be okay with letting a lot of it go out to the public?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the process of it was that I just in 2018 I decided I was going to do, for a little while I was doing diary comics every day because I'd done them kind of in the past a little bit to just kind of process things, and so I was like, I mean, part of it with me was just trying to do something that I wished I'd seen other cartoonists do. Like when I was younger, I was obsessive about trying to figure out how comics were in the how they operated in the pre-internet age. So I got all these like early like Ben Dunn Ninja High School things and interviews with Adam Warren and whatever that kind of pieced together what the life of a professional cartoonist was like. So I kind of had that seed of being fascinated by it really early on. And then putting together the actual book just started to get really therapeutic. And we were talking a little bit before how we went on about the idea of kind of like telling stories sometimes, but leaving things out. And it's interesting. I had to set kind of rules for myself surviving on Mars. And one of them was to talk about things from an emotional point of view. And I ended up cropping a bunch of comics because I didn't want to throw anyone's name in the street when I was talking about people, behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is good because some people, they don't mind throwing people's business out there.
Yeah.
So
yeah, certainly. But yeah, I mean, I think the last couple of years comics has gotten, there's a lot of hostility, and I think it's important to kind of build a community that doesn't play the kind of hostility game and is just here because comics are exciting and a cool art form to engage with.
Yeah, for sure. That's what we appreciate. That we love that. Like, just let the books do the talking, and all the rest of the noise. Just turn the volume down.
Yeah, and there's something about like one of my guidelines for social media even is like if I have something that's bothering me, I try to put it in the work and not put it online, because it's really kind of a lazy version of things sometimes. It just like vent to the void rather than trying to use those complicated feelings to put into work.
You mentioned that you like stand-up comedy a lot, and I kind of got the feeling that you paced the book kind of like how a lot of stand-up comedians do. You'll go in and you'll have some really serious, personal, kind of almost sad stuff going on, and then a couple pages later you bring it back up. Like, was that on purpose? Did you use the stand-up comedy routines as kind of a outlier for that, or was that just how you felt like pacing the book?
That's a cool comparison. I was actually specifically looking at poetry books because I was thinking of things that have these little, like sometimes it helps me to put together books to imagine how somebody's going to approach it. And the way that I read poetry books is I'll just like, I'll just bring one to a coffee shop and read like 3 or 4 of them, in between sketching or whatever. And so it was kind of put together. I try to put pauses in books a lot. Like sometimes I'll do it by having chapter titles, like something that gives you an opportunity to be like, I paid $30 for this. I'm going to read 10 pages of it, and here's a good place to pause.
I noticed A lot of their work have those breaks.
Yeah.
Yeah, like sometimes the trades like have chapter breaks. And it's always nice. I love a good chapter break in a book. And Moonray is one of your newer works too.
Right.
I think volume 2 is out actually as well. Just dropped about a month ago.
Yeah. I've got his volume 2. Really nice hardcover books.
And then something I love, a matte finish, man.
Oh yeah. The printing on them. Living the Line is a newer publisher that I've been doing the Surviving on Mars and Moonray with, and Sean, the publisher. So his pre-press work and printing and everything is the best that I've ever gotten. Mm-hmm. It's like he told me that he's been like following my work for decades, and he's been thinking about how he wanted to see it printed. So it's working out nicely for me.
They have an interesting lineup of books too. Living the Line. Johnny and I were talking. It kind of bridges the gap between, let's say, like Image and Fantagraphics. It's kind of a middle ground between the two.
More like Oni Press and Fantagraphics.
Oni Press and Fanta.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can see. Yeah, they're definitely because I felt kind of like I don't quite fit into most publishers. Mm-hmm. Like obviously I've done a lot of work with Image and they're fantastic to work with, but it's really nice to. It's always funny whenever I meet people outside of comics and they're like, "What do you do?" I'll be like, "I do comics. Like I do all this stuff for Image," and I'll be like, like Walking Dead and Spawn, which is not a good description of what I do, but it's like the touch points that people know. And so Living the Line, I feel like with their kind of weird lineup of old horror manga and indie comics, it's like a perfect place for a lot of my work.
Nice.
And with Moonray, you working with Zurzo again. I actually used to talk to him a lot on before I got kicked off of Facebook. He did I think they only ended up putting out the one issue of Keem, right? The second issue of that never actually ended up coming out.
Yeah, he's done 100 extra pages of it. Yeah, it's just plain. Kem was like we did this thing called 8 House years ago at Image, and it was going to be like this shared universe thing, but I don't think I planned it particularly well, so it didn't. I think people were a little confused by it, and we only put out one trade in the end.
Yeah,
but
Johnny and I were just talking about that before you hopped on, because that one I hadn't seen before, and so I was asking Johnny about it, and that's what he said. He's like, "Yeah, there's one. It was supposed to be like a shared universe." And there's one volume and stuff, so I'll definitely hit that up and read that. I haven't read that yet, so that's fun. It'll be something to look forward to.
Okay, cool. Yeah,
I was getting all the issues. I had Yoris, I had Keem, I had and the next thing I know, they're like, "Yeah, we're gonna put out Mirror, but it's not part of 8 House, and 8 House is over." And I was just like, "What the fuck? Come on, man."
Yeah. It was a weird time for me just because it was like. I felt this obligation to try all these different things, like because for a while I felt like I was helping a lot of different creators to try to get a foothold at Image more. So I wanted to do things that didn't kind of fit the Walking Dead Spawn thing. So I was doing the anthology Island and also 8 House at the same time, and there's a lot of spinning plates.
Island was so good. I
Thanks.
15 issues wasn't enough, but it was a good run, and like so many great strips in that book, man. Like so original. What was the guy's name who did Tarot? Oh man, I loved the Tarot strips in Island.
Oh yeah, Gail Bertrand. Yeah. That's one of my. I think Land Called Tarot. I mean, it's hard to pick favorites, but that and the Matt and Malachi kind of post-human book. I'm spacing on the name of. What was that one called? But yeah, there's a Land Called Tarot is like it was a silent comic, and they put out a hardcover. It's one of the comics that I like show to people who think they've read every great comic because it's so brilliant, and there's nothing else really like it.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, Habitat by Simon Roy was very good. Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Kind of actually introduced me to him. We're planning on having him on the show soon too.
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
Simon's a cool guy.
Nice. Yeah, I still talk to Simon a lot.
Like to have the whole crew on, actually,
Yeah,
certainly.
You, Farrell, Simon, yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah, all the Prophet guys.
Yeah,
Here's my Prophet tattoo. You guys can see it.
Cool.
We went and got matching tattoos at the end of the book.
Oh yeah, the whole creative team.
Yanni didn't because he's in Greece, but everyone that was in the Americas. or at
So-
least the people that did the major stuff.
How did that come about? Did they approach you about that, or was that something you wanted to do? Tackle like an old Liefeld thing and actually like make it something mind blowing and extraordinary?
They went to me. I if I remember right, I think James Stocco they asked to do it first,
Okay.
and I probably made fun of him about it.
Then it fell in your lap.
Yeah, and then it fell in my lap, and I was like, "I'm gonna be a hypocrite." But I was at an Emerald City convention, and Eric Stevenson, the publisher of Image, floated like, "What would you do with this thing?" And I was like, "Well, give me the convention to walk around and think about it." And I ended up talking to Eric Larson of Savage Dragon fame. I found him in a hotel lobby and asked his opinion about what he would do with it. And he was like, "Well, you gotta do it like Kirby's Commandy." And I was like, "Oh yeah, totally, just like Commandy." And then I was like, immediately, like, "I've never read Commandy. I'm gonna go check it out." So I went home and found all the Commandy issues I could, and I remember just thinking, like, I can't really out Kirby, but what would my version of this be? And I think working with Simon was a really big part of it in the early issues.
Yeah. It's a really cool reimagining of the character, right? It's really interesting. I haven't read all the way through. I've read a chunk of it, and what I've read so far, I just started reading it this year. I picked it up and slowly reading my way through between when I have free time, when I'm not reading mandatory stuff for for the show. So I'm fitting some of it in here and there. It's awesome. Like, and the whole creative team, you have Beryl on there doing the occasional issue here and there, and Simon's on there, and
I'll help you with the names because Yanni Milo Giannis was one of the main artists.
Yeah.
And Grim Wilkins showed up later, and then just a ton of other artists to try to do things. Like we got pinups from Jeff Darrow in there, and like Liefeld even did some stuff in later issues.
Did you work with him on that, or is it just more like he just had a mandate to do a few things, sent it over, and there was no real like? Did you pick his brain a little bit to see what he originally, or were you like, let's just wipe the slate clean and just go our own way with it?
I certainly tried to pick it. Liefeld's a funny guy. He's like really enthusiastic, and he's like, he just approaches comics so like, I was doing indie comics in the 90s, so I always had this very Vanilla Ice image of Liefeld.
Okay.
Like not the most positive idea of him, but then like working for him and getting to know him, like it really was useful for me, and being like, this guy loves comics so much that it doesn't matter to him all the bullshit. He's just going to enjoy what he enjoys about it. And I felt with Prophet, it was always in a funny place between, Alan Moore was going to do Prophet at one point.
Yeah.
And if I remember right, it turned into one of his America's Best Comics things. Tom Strong, I think.
Okay. The Terra Obscura stuff. Cool.
Yeah. And so, it's interesting to try to think of like the area between Liefeld and Alan Moore. But yeah, my interactions with Liefeld were all really positive. I would sometimes try to ask him specific things about like what do you think of this thing? Where should I go with it? And he'd always just write back like, just do whatever you want, man. I don't care. Have fun. Like, so it was total freedom and there's no complaints. But it was a weird process in that like, it wasn't like I had like my knowledge of the previous stuff was basically what I could find in Vancouver, BC comic stores. So I would like go into the local comic stores and just go through all the back issues and find old Wizard magazines with things. So there's things like I'd done like 2 or 3 trades until somebody told me that there was, because a big theme of Prophet is that there's one guy who an entire race of humanity, basically what's left of humanity is all clones of this one guy. And I didn't realize until I was in like the 2nd or 3rd trade, like 15 issues in, that there was a clone character that Liefeld had created in one of the early issues. So a lot of it was kind of piecemealing together that and like Youngblood comics and kind of his whole universe.
Yeah.
So it helped that I was like 10,000 years in the future and Prophet and making things kind of vague, because a lot of it, like, I'd be like, I found another issue, more stuff.
Or yeah.
And I got interesting notes. Like, I remember the publisher of Image, Eric, specifically he'd done a comic with Eric Canetti that had never, like, they'd done an issue and it never come out, but it was a Die Hard, the kind of robot cyborg guy from Youngblood.
Youngblood,
Got a comic together where he becomes human again, or he is human, like he's there. So basically, one of the mandates I got is that Die Hard has to have been human at some point in case this comic ever gets finished and they publish it. So the timeline.
Okay.
And then at a certain point, they asked me to give Prophet the mask again, because he didn't have the mask in the initial things. And something I'm really proud of about the series is we did a technique in it where every time, because Simon was in art school when he was doing the comic, and
serious, nice.
I remember it being a funny thing where he would have people come and give talks sometimes at school about how to be a professional comic artist while he was, like, competing with them on stands, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, so Simon did the first 3 issues, and then it was a big thing of like he has such a unique, cool style. Like, who else can we find to do this kind of stuff? And so I got Farrell Dalrymple involved, as an old friend of mine, and we had him do a different Prophet, like a different clone of the guy, so it made sense with a different art style. And then Yanni came in, and it was another style, and so yeah, the whole conceit of it basically being that every time you see the universe through a different character's vision, it's drawn slightly different, and so
that's cool.
Which I don't think I hadn't seen before.
That's an interesting way to approach it. Yeah, when you change the artists up, it's the different clones kind of path, which is really cool idea. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I was really happy with that, and it was one of those things where it's like it really allowed, because there's an element of, like, you follow a comic for a while and they switch artists and suddenly you feel like everything's drawn wrong. But it became a really fun thing of, like, let's use this artist to show how this character looks, and then we can see how they actually think of themselves through this style.
But I think all the styles, that was one of the things I was going to say, like, they all have their own flair or flavor, but I find the styles fit well together, so it isn't jarring from one when you switch from one artist to the other. Like, it isn't such a departure one from the other where, there's at least a little bit of a harmony and a certain feel to it, where it's not, like you said, where it feels like you're reading a whole different comic, altogether.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and we had a couple touchstones where, like, we were always talking about, like, John Buscema Conan and old Metal Hurlant heavy metal as like it kind of had to fit in that wheelhouse, and that helped a lot to. But there were certain times where, like, people would, where I talked to artists that I liked a lot, and I was trying to figure out ways for them to fit in, but some styles just, I felt like, didn't kind of mesh with the universe.
And I remember you kind of touch on it in Life on Mars, or Surviving on Mars. Like, so many people just couldn't understand the fact that the focus shifted different characters in the book. You know what I mean? And try to saying that the book was incomprehensible, which I obviously, like, they never read anything European. You know what I mean? At that point, that was like my thinking. I'm just like, okay, check out something besides Big Two.
Yeah. I've got a friend who's kind of newer in comics, guy Wyatt Kennedy, who's doing this book called Nights over at Image, and I always chastise him because he reads reviews exactly like I would back then, and he's like, it kind of gets under his skin sometimes, and I feel like there's a certain element of, like, of not everything being for everyone that I think is really important for comic creators to remember. And so, like when I was doing, like, Prophet was my attempt to do kind of a more mainstream book, but then I kind of quickly became aware of, like, that's not really worth, like I go to the comic store every week, and most of what Marvel and DC does just kind of doesn't click with me. Like, sometimes there's things that really work, but it's important, I think, like, something that I've really tried to do is make comics for people that are going to the comic store and aren't super excited about the next X-Men, but also to have things where they're readable for those people too. So I think that's the difficulty in review stuff, is sometimes there's a lot of style things in Marvel and DC comics that I think people get really locked into, and they expect things to be explained a certain way, and the cadence will be the same. And if you're coming from different influences, you're gonna not, it's like, it's like showing up in France and trying to use pesos or something. It's like different currency.
Yeah. But like you said, I like, like the comic book medium is for everyone, but not every comic is for everybody. I think that's where the people have to make the distinction, right? And that's where you got to understand. You have the indie side, you have the big corporate properties that are run a much different way. So
well, that's bleeding over now. You got the indies putting out big corporate properties now. You got Image. I think even Oni's putting. No, not is.
You mean like licensed?
Yeah.
Mad Cave is getting into it now. Is it Oni the other one that has?
Oni does have.
Or
no, Speed Racer. I think is also going to be
Mad Cave.
Oh yeah, but Oni is Rick and Morty, and actually, interestingly enough, they've been doing. If I think it's Oni, they're doing Power Lords, which is an action figure property that the Prophet team was approached with a decade ago, and we actually came up with a pitch for what we would do with Power Lords, just because me and Simon Roy are big fans of Wayne Douglas Barlow, who's a illustrator who does he did this book called Barlow's Guide to Extraterrestrials. That was a big deal on me when I was a kid, and it's just a bunch of illustrations of different science fiction aliens that were from novels, and he did drawings or paintings of them, and he did a book of what his version of hell would be like called Barlow's Inferno. That's really amazing, where they use human souls as building materials and everything. But in the 80s, he'd done this action figures thing called Power Lords, that were basically toys that could transform, and they're like meat transformers, I guess.
Meat transformers.
They're like
so there's like had a body horror element to it, or
they're like guys that turned into aliens. They you move them around, they turn to aliens. And so I think it was me and Simon and Matt Sheehan and Malachi Ward were going to do this whole thing with Power Lords. But I think the deal was just kind of at the time they were like, you find a publisher and send us money, and everything. Like, I don't know if this really is going to make us more money than doing our own stuff that we actually own. But yeah, it is. Comics is in a really interesting time right now, just in how different it is than it was a decade or two ago, and I think it's allowing for new. It's allowing for new types of comics. Like a big thing now is you have the whole market of like manga being read by people that don't go into comic stores. And so it's really cool to see like something I've been thinking a lot of now is like, if in 1995 you want to do a horror manga aimed at high school girls, it would flop. There'd be no place to put it. But now you could do that, and it would be like one of the biggest markets out there.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I find is really cool. A lot of people think that manga is going to kill American comics, and I don't think it will, because I think manga has been bigger than American comics since at least 2001. That's when the really big shift happened, but like it was growing before then. But like you said, like I can go into the office at my work, and I do construction, and like there might be a lady in there that reads comics, maybe, but I could go in there and I could definitely find one that reads manga and talk to. You know what I mean?
Yeah, certainly. And in the 90s, there was this big stigma that manga had to be like manga had to be made by Japanese. It had to be authentic and made for the Japanese market and put over here. And that's just gone, I think, with Korean comics.
The Miwa,
yeah, with manhwa, it's like readers are much more accepting of stuff, and I think that now is the first time that American readers would be just as accepting if Americans did like Takobon manga style format. And I've seen a couple, but I imagine the next decade we'll get like an actual hit where someone does something like that.
And I see you fishing for compliments. You kind of helped bridge the thing where it's okay for American and Western people to work on manga yourself. Like you were one of the first people approached to do an actual like Western manga with King City. So
yeah, I mean, I think in that era, I can't take, because I think like Brian O'Malley really took the cake. I mean, that's our best example. Is Scott Pilgrim was exactly like the perfect kind of a manga that you could, or a manga format that you could send to Americans. Like with King City, it's like I was really happy to break out of the manga format and finally get to the the big size.
That came out in regular North American comic size.
Yeah, because initially it was published as a little paperback thing by Tokyo
Okay.
Pop, and then when I took it over to Image, we published it much larger. I have it here.
That nice oversized, yeah, man,
This
big
is
square.
the
Yeah.
giant thing, and only half of it was in the Takobon. Because yeah, I can show you the somewhere in here. Oh yeah, so this is the Tokyo Pop version, and it's like
all Tokyo Pop books are that version, right? Like
yeah,
yeah.
and this one's only half of what's in this one.
I love King City. I think that's one of my favorite things I've read of yours so far. I really enjoyed it. I love just the quirkiness of it, the whole Cat Masters. There's just so many weird little things that I really love in it. It's really fun, and I really love black and white comics. John and I are a big fan of black and white comics, and there's one specific page where you use this little technique, and it's just so fucking effective. And I wanted to bring it up here. Is this page here?
Oh,
I love how you gray it. Everything's like in a gray toned, and then you just everything's white, right? And you do that offset with the line work, and it really makes it look like bam, like it pops off the page, like it really looks like there's a flash, you know. And I thought that was so perfectly executed. Like it really feels like there's like a spark and a flash, and I love the way you did that. And I was like, you know, like you're not limited in black and white comics if you do it properly. Like you can do so much with it. You don't really need color all the time, and I think that's a perfect example of how you can do it, right?
Yeah, I'm actually working on a black and white comic again for the first time in years. Let's see if I have pages in that around here. Where did I put this thing? Yeah, oh, here it is. I'm drawing this thing gigantic. So you can even see the pages. So this is the thing I'm working on called Homunculus Dynasty. That we're going to do the first 3/4 of it in black and white, and then the end of the comic goes into color.
Nice.
Basically about like a future society of Frankenstein people that grow their own organs.
Wow.
Hey, we might be getting there soon, eh? People growing their own organs and stuff.
Yeah,
so it's not a far-fetched idea.
Yeah, I remember the last couple William Gibson books, him talking about how like he did a couple books that were basically read like science fiction, but it was all technology that was possible now.
Mm-hmm.
I remember he had people putting on like Oculus glasses and walking out in the street and seeing like art shows that where they made like kind of fake versions of reality, and you could go to like celebrity death sites and see like this is where River Phoenix died, and his body would be there.
That's pretty morbid.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But knowing our society, man, with all the people addicted to true crime shit and that type of stuff, I wouldn't put it past it, man, to like literally have that type of thing. I'd go see where the Black Dahlia died and shit.
Yeah.
Ooh, we got Living a Line here, and we got a really great comment here from a teacher who in Barcelona who shows her kids King City and started asking if it was a manga. That's pretty cool.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I've been to Barcelona. It's really amazing city.
Yeah, you've traveled a lot. You've been around. Like, I mean, you've been out west here in Canada for a while. You've been around the block, man. You've traveled. You've seen different corners of the world. Is that something that you set out to do, or is it just happenstance? Just that's the way it worked out, or?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even leave I lived in New York in my kind of second half of my 20s because I grew up in Seattle, and I didn't really go, like I didn't leave the continental United States until I was in my 30s, and then I got to go to like Hong Kong and Australia and a bunch of places in Europe, and it's really cool. I haven't traveled in a little while, but yeah, it all feels it all felt kind of accidental at the time. Just like the Australia trip was really fun because I got to go out there with my friend Phil Barlow, who did this comic called Zooniverse that we published a little bit of it in Ireland, and who did all the character designs on a bunch of cartoons that I grew up on, like the Extreme Ghostbusters.
Okay.
And Alf, the Alf cartoon.
Alf. Yeah.
And I got to go to the Sydney Opera House and do a talk with him and his wife Helen, who also does art. And Matt Groening and Linda Berry were out there too, so we got to hang out with them a little bit. That was a very interesting trip.
Cool. Yeah.
So I know Johnny and I were kind of like, we were arguing. He's like, yeah, I think Brandon's Canadian. I was like, I don't know. He's like, well, he lived out west in Vancouver. I was like, oh, maybe, because I mean, they're like, yeah, I think he's friends with Stoko, and Stoko's out there, so maybe they grew up together out west or something. We weren't sure because you're there, then you move down to like LA, and then I was like, I don't know, he's in LA now. When I see your post, it's written LA, and like, you're there for a while, so I was like, I don't know, man.
Yeah, Stoko is younger than me. I met him when he was a teenager, and I was in my 30s.
Okay.
But yeah, I married a Canadian for a decade, so I was up in Vancouver, BC.
That's why you were here.
Yeah, the artist of Arclight, Marion Churchland, I was married to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then when that ended, I left. I was banished from Canada.
Banished, yeah. It's those pesky.
Okay, so you growing up in New York, that explains a lot of the stuff that was in Escalator. Then a lot of the stories. So that anecdote about like where you were talking about walking around the streets and Paul Pope being out with a shirt off and stuff like that, was that actually was based on a real event? Or
I was talking to someone recently about like one of my favorite things about New York was that like I just worked I worked kind of unloading trucks at the Strand bookstore for a long time, which is an unpleasant job, but I was desperately trying to break into comics while I was there. And I remember walking around and having these kind of bummer days. And then you'd see Frank Miller just walk by you on the street. And like, that would brighten me up I'd be like, that was Frank Miller. Like I saw Neil Adams in person once when I was having a rough day or Paul Pope. So it would be like my comic book heroes just like around me in this environment. It was really exciting.
That's cool.
And then I was really lucky when I was out there. I met a bunch of the kind of SBA kids, like at Farrell Dalrymple and Becky Cloonan and James Jean and all these people that went on to just like fantastic work outside of New York.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Becky, she's gotten so big she doesn't even draw anymore. She just has other people draw for her, which has got to be great. You know what I mean? And she is mass talented. Actually, like in her newest distillery book, she's actually drawn again, which I was actually really excited to see because I really did. I dug her artwork that she did early on with Brian Wood,
Sure.
like demo and all that.
Yeah. Somebody just mailed me a bunch of her distillery books. I haven't read them yet, but they look really cool.
Yeah, Salma with her and Tula. I can't think of two more talented ladies out there, man, doing some stuff.
Yeah, I picked up one recently because there's an artist named Hamlet Machine that they put in there who normally just does adult comics. She does like science fiction gay adult comics that are like brilliant, even just on the science fiction level. And so I think the distillery is the first people to actually publish her stuff in like normal comic channels.
Right on. I'll have to look her up. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of NSFW, but like I will check it out because especially if people I like do it, and if it's done in the European style, if it's not just American smut comic, I'll definitely get into it. And you kind of have a past at that, right? Like we talked off air, you had Pillow Fight and Perverts of the Unknown, which are two of your earliest works, right? Published works.
Yeah. Initially, I'd done a couple miniseries with like Texas manga companies like Radio Comics and Antarctic Press, but I started doing inking jobs for NBM, who did a bunch of translated European adult comics, and they had a magazine called Sizzle that I ran those in.
Okay, they originally ran in a magazine and then got picked up as like solo books. Cool.
Yeah, exactly. And it was funny because initially I was really reluctant to do porn comics at all. I thought it was beneath me. Mm-hmm. And it's funny to remember back to being like 23 and thinking that, because now it's like, I'm like, I got to make more time to do adult comics, because I do think I always equate like porn comics and horror and comedy are things where you're promising the reader a specific emotion. So it's like if science fiction could evoke any emotion, it still counts as science fiction. But those things, I think it's really interesting because like I feel like adult comics I've always kind of failed at a little bit, because I think that there's a goal that I'm reaching for, and it's kind of leading me towards wanting to do horror comics, because I like the idea of like, how do you draw pictures that evoke a specific emotion you're aiming for.
So is that something that you plan to do in the future? Is do like a straight up horror comic, or is that just a idea that you keep?
Yeah, it's definitely something I want to try out, because I talked earlier about like manga is such a different, bigger market right now than comics. And working with Living the Line, one of their best-selling books right now is Her Frankenstein, which is which is really interesting because it's like a horror manga that was made in the 1960s, if I remember right, and it was just made for an environment that was like where you'd go into like a book rental shop and you know, pay your money and be able to read the comics while you're there and get a cup of coffee, and just that there's a market now of books in bookstores that people are excited to read, you know, 60s manga. So I think it'd be really interesting to do like a very American version of that. And my work's always been kind of comfort based. Like I always think about how I have to spend 6 or 8 hours on every page I do. So I want it to be like a nice environment to spend my time in. And so horror is something I've kind of avoided a lot because it's like uncomfortability.
Well, you touched on it a little bit. Like you had a werewolf in multiple Warheads. Nick was, but he was a funny werewolf. You know what I mean? He didn't really. The reason why he was a werewolf was a very funny circumstance. It was the name of the book is because he had a werewolf's penis. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that started as an adult comic in that same Sizzle magazine I mentioned before.
Yeah. The first take of it, but then you kind of took it and made it something a little more. There was still some kinkiness to it, but like the actual series that you did, I wouldn't really call it adult.
Yeah,
no more than like a Mobius book, maybe.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Johnny brought up your other earlier works, and when we weren't live, you're saying you're reprinting a lot of your older stuff. Can you touch on that a bit? Like, is it going to be like in a collection, an anthology, or is it you're just going to release it all individually as they were originally released, but just reprinted?
Well, one plan, I'm still kind of working with Living the Line on this stuff, but one idea was that I had this book Escalator that came out years ago.
Yeah,
it was a collection of kind of my early short stories, and I did this other series called Universe So Big with Radio Comics. And I did 3 issues of it, but only 2 of them were actually published. So that could be like a self-contained, you know, like 250 page big book of old stuff, and then I want to do a couple of new short stories for it as well.
And then you could get that 3rd issue that wasn't printed. You could have that one added in that wasn't previously, so you get like a little bonus content.
Yeah,
with
exactly.
Stuff that people haven't seen before. That's cool.
Yeah, and so that I think that'll be the first one, because one of the things like it's interesting to try to figure out how to navigate living as a cartoonist, because like I want to take time and do kind of riskier projects that are kind of out there that don't necessarily have like a page rate connected to a publisher. So I think one of the ways that I can kind of do that is by getting a bunch of books of mine that people that aren't available back in print. And like I have my adult comics that I want to get back in print too. I just recently colored all of my old Pillow Fight book again, and gave myself a bunch of rules of like I wasn't allowed to read. I was like, you can redraw 2 panels if the anatomy is too attractive. But yeah, I'm excited to get that stuff back in print. And my partner Casey now is like really helpful with that stuff, because she was reading my comics before we ever met, and so she's always like talking about trying to find my work and it being very frustrating for her. So I'm kind of putting her in charge of like, let's figure out what books of mine you'd want to check out and make them more widely available.
I share the same opinion as her. So yeah. So that's awesome. When you told us that, I was like, yes, because like there's a couple books I'd like to read, and like you can't even find, even if you tried to find a pirated version of them. Like
Sure.
that's how scarce your early work is, right? Like, so it's going to be awesome that you're reprinting it. And you know what? You're not unfamiliar with Kickstarter. So are you going to do like you did with Moonray, do the Kickstarter and then publish with like, let's say, Living the Line type deal like you did with Moonray, or is that kind of like the business model that you're looking at, or the
no, I think that's a really cool business model that I think Living the Line is really convinced me of how good it is, because I mean we've been calling them pre-sales,
Mhm.
and it just makes it much easier to fund a book, to be like, if like, it's almost like dipping your toes in the water and being like, if people want this book enough, we'll print it, and it lets you know, like, if people don't want it, they don't pre-order it, and you're not wasting anyone's time. Luckily, we've been lucky enough that people are excited about the stuff, and it's been doing better than we expect.
Yeah,
But yeah,
because both volumes of Moonray were kickstarted, I believe, right?
yeah, exactly. And I've been talking to friends of mine that in other ends of comics about how good that is as a way. Like right now, comics in this weird place where I feel like it's really hard to find out about new exciting books, and really hard to sell new exciting books. And everyone's always talking about how the attrition's so bad that if a new comic comes out, that by issue 6 it's no longer selling enough to fund it.
Mhm.
And pre-sales and Kickstarters, I think it hits a totally different audience of people that aren't necessarily going to comic stores every week. In the same way we were talking before about kind of the manga market, it's like, even if comics is in kind of a weird place sometimes, like, one of the coolest things about this era of comics is, if you love the medium, you don't have to sell it a certain way. There's a bunch of different venues.
Avenues, yeah,
Yeah.
to approach it from, yeah.
Like we talk about all the time, we kind of wish that the European and Japanese sales market would actually take off over here. We like the idea of like original graphic novels, selling the tome instead of floppies, because most books are written as graphic novels or
Certainly
for a trade.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really changes up. The black and white book I mentioned, Homunculus Dynasty, that I'm working on, like, that thing we're just doing, it's almost going to be the size of a record, like a weird square thing.
Okay.
And it's just something that, like, working so much for comic stores, there's things where people would always be like, don't change the format too much, because comic stores will complain. And if that's not your only market, then you can play around with a lot of different weird things.
Yeah, that's cool, because Johnny and I were, before you hopped on with us, we were like, do you think he's done making black and white comics? Because all your more recent works, most of them are all colored now, right? And I was like,
yeah,
I loved his black and white stuff. I wonder, and then you come out and you pull out those pages and you're saying you're doing a black and white comic again. And so that was cool. That was great to hear, and hyped for it. Yeah.
I'm really I do really like black and white comics. I never thought I would be working in color full time, but it is it is such a cool storytelling thing you can do with color comics, that it's, I mean, I guess with black and white as well. But yeah, it's nice to force myself back into what I used to do.
Well, at least with your color comics, your choice of colors are really good, and it fits your style. You don't try to do too bold a coloring. I really like the kind of, I'm not going to say muted pastels, but I don't know how else to put the tones that you use, because they're almost bright, but you choose a hue that's just short of being like obnoxious, and I really enjoy that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went back during the pandemic. I went back and read all the Tintin books. I have all them here. And my other tattoo on my arm is a Tintin tattoo. It's this one. Oh, there we go. It's the Cigars and the Pharaoh. And I realized, like, I was always a big Mobius guy. And then I realized I was kind of going back at where Mobius got a lot of his stuff, and finding, like, the clear line Hergé stuff, and how he was going and looking at Japanese woodblock prints, and this kind of, because I feel like my style is a big mix of, like, American independent underground comics mixed with European and Japanese, and it's really cool to see different eras, and like the in like the 50s, having Hergé go and doing kind of his own version of mix of Japanese and French comics, or Belgian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So do you do all your pen and inks? Is it all traditional all the time, or do you work digital at all?
I've never kind of cracked the code on working digital. It just always feels a little like I like paper too much.
Nice. Okay.
And there's the added advantage of you can sell the originals.
Yeah.
As long as you don't got a stack of dildos on top of the light table.
That's a problem.
That anecdote killed me, man. That was real? Like, when you first got to Vegas, you were staying at a porn shoot house?
I mean, I still am, kind of, but yeah.
Oh, really?
I mean, again, well, I live with me and my partner Casey live with two girls that are porn performers now, and that's kind of it's a big house, so there's lots of room to hide away from the moans. But But yeah, that was a previous house that I did that comic about, where I was living with. We got this gigantic house for a while. It's like a like a living a fraternity, and we had a bunch of different porn performer girls that were our housemates or that would come and stay with us. And yeah, I made a lot of story. I made a bunch of notes for future diary comic stuff, and just a lot of it with Surviving on Mars is I was almost like I wanted to talk about what felt kind of emotionally relevant at the time, and kind of getting over kind of a rough period in my life, and a lot of depression and everything. So some anecdotes came in, like that one was really easy. I kind of just wanted to draw the couch. Like we had this really weird white cube couch that was really fun to draw, and then that happened where my housemates were shooting a scene on it and then left their. Luckily I have light tables in my room now, so I don't have to.
Okay. The strap-on's not sitting there going, "Sup, bro? Do you know more?"
Right, exactly. Yeah, and it's something about Vegas that's been really interesting to me is being around people that don't read comics, because I feel like I cloistered myself off so much in just a comics community that suddenly seeing other types of humans that aren't, like most of the people around read manga. Like, one of my housemates is obsessed with My Hero Academia, but I don't think she's ever read a comic of mine.
Well, you can show her that, like, you're quoted on almost all the issues of Dora Hedoro. You know what I mean? That was always cool for me to see.
Oh yeah, that's a good one to get in. That's such a cool book.
Yeah, it's very singular. I've read quite a bit of horror manga and manga in general, and yeah, I haven't seen anybody hit them same notes that Q has.
Yeah, and really fascinating that comic's done by a woman. Like manga kind of blurs those lines a lot. Like how much a lot of like Rumiko Takahashi's horror stuff feels like aimed at young men more.
You have newsletters. Is that, I can't remember if it's I signed up for it a while back. Is that through Substack or?
Yeah, I think it's through Substack.
Yeah, and
but yeah, it's you can find it through my Instagram. I think there's a link.
Yeah, so if you go on your Instagram, you can hit that up, and it's fun. You guys, you each post like your week, kind of what you've been up to, what you've done, watched, read, whatever. It's a fun newsletter. So if people are interested to get a little more insights into the stuff you guys post on socials, if you get that newsletter, it gives you like just little insights to the pictures that you and Casey post on socials. So yeah, it's fun to combine the two and kind of see what it's all about.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's been cool. Casey mostly, my partner Casey mostly puts them together, and it's kind of back what we were talking before about how she's like I'm always like, what would you want from, like, if you're from the outside kind of engaging with my work, what would be interesting and fun for you to, because I follow a bunch of artists Patreons, and I have one of those as well, and I'm always like I want to see what artists that I like are up to and what they're doing. It's like so much of my own interest, like I got really into Faith No More because there's an early Adam Warren Dirty Pair comic where the characters are karaokeing Faith No More, and 30 years later I'm still listening to the music just because Adam Warren put it in a panel. So these kind of little glimpses inside of the lives of people whose work you like, I think are really fun.
That's another, we're talking about how there's different venues how you can release your work. Patreon's another perfect example.
Sure.
Where like with the tiers is what the creators do is give you perks where you get like the PDFs before maybe even a publisher picks up their works and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool to follow some Patreons for that with the creators. They, I think they do weekly posts and yeah. I don't know if yours is set up the same way or.
Mine is more process oriented. I know Simon Roy does, like, he'll put in his entire comics as he does them up there.
As he does them? Okay.
Yeah, which I've kind of wondered if I should do that, but part of it is like when I'm doing Moonray, it's like it's kind of made for people to read in print. That's an interesting thing we talked about, kind of writing for the trade before, with like a lot of comics being done for the trade.
Yeah.
With Moonray, it's like I have these like 160-page books that I'm writing toward, and the initial one we kind of didn't know it was just I was making it to kind of flesh out the lore of the video game.
Yeah.
And now I'm working on book 4, and I'm kind of hit this new stride with it where I realize I'm on page 60, and I'm like, I can I can do really weird things in this that I couldn't do in if you're putting out a 24-page comic, you can't really blow 6 pages on just establishing shots of a weird environment. And now we're even doing something that Sean recommended recently is we're gonna do a fold out, like a 4-page fold out in the middle of the book.
In the middle of the, that's cool.
That's gonna work sequentially, and I've been doing a bunch of layouts trying to figure out like what's the most interesting. Because the only time I've ever seen that was there's an issue of Wildcats where the girl kicks someone in the head, and it's like you fold it out, and it's like her leg kicking his head. And it's really fun, but I'm like, there's so much that could be done with that.
Yeah. So that's one thing Johnny and I were wondering about is Moonray.
Yeah.
So
How did that get involved, man? Like, did they reach out to you? Like, do you have full reign on creating the lore, or do they give you notes for the characters? Like, what you need to write for them? Because it's an arena fighter game, kind of like Fortnite, kind of, right? I believe.
Yeah, more like a Street Fighter kind of thing. But the goal is to kind of build it out so it's more like a Fortnite kind of open universe thing. So Moonray is a really weird project in that the guys that created it, Rodrigo and Diego and Hans are the main kind of creators of the idea of this kind of weird post-human science fiction fighting game. And they were reading Prophet when it was coming out. And so they reached out to me and were basically like, they had a trailer for the game, and they're like, here's the trailer for the game. Can you help us figure out the lore for it and all the backstory? So initially it was me and Farrell Dalrymple were doing a bunch of work for it. And then I started doing the comic and brought in Shersho to work with me on it. And now Shersho is the art director of the game. So it's like, it has his hand in the actual game, but it's total freedom. Like it's kind of like the Liefeld situation where I'll check with them, but they're always like, yeah, just do whatever you want to do. A funny anecdote is I was trying to rein in some things and make it more science fiction exploratory. Like I kept thinking it's like tourism of alien worlds and alien and future societies when humans are long gone. And I got a phone call from one of the creators of it, Rodrigo, and he was like, you can make things sexier and weirder if you want. And so like, we're adding a bunch of like stranger elements in the later books.
Okay. Yeah, because you're saying you're on volume 4 now?
Yeah.
Oh wow! So it's art. Wow, that's close to 200 pages, right? Each volume.
160 roughly? Each volume, yeah. But
160.
Yeah. And then Shersho did backups in the first, and actually in book 3 we've got 40 pages of Shersho.
So there's going to be a hell of a lot of lore to it then if you're up
yeah. And I started out kind of with this idea that I was going to try to use it to parse apart how I felt about different ideologies. Like I had these different cultures, and I was like, this is like a communist place, and this is going to be like exploring Zen Buddhism or something.
Because in the first one, I had a quick question. Sure. Because the character finds his name, right? And his name is Adam.
Right.
And then you have this character, the red woman,
right,
which was his sword. So is that like kind of like the story of Adam and Eve, where the rib becomes the woman and his sword is kind of represents the rib that becomes the woman? Or I was reading that, I was like, it's almost kind of like Adam and Eve, and like he's a tier of a god that created the first person, right, which was him, and then from him having that sword comes to life, and like, so I was like, I wonder if that's just slightly inspired by like the story of Adam and Eve, or if
that's just his name is kind of a bastardization of like, because he finds this library that's basically like sentient mushrooms, like funguses that that store knowledge, and so he gets this kind of warped version of the story of the biblical story of Adam, where his name comes from. I hadn't made the rib connection before, but I'm like, that works too well for me not to take credit for it. Because a lot of it was just thinking about like this idea of like, if humans manage to survive, like because none of the characters in the book, like there's no humans in the book, humanity's dead. They're all basically, humanity figures out a way to transfer their consciousness into these bodies that won't die. And then even if the bodies are destroyed, they regrow have forgotten who they are. So it's kind of like the remnants of humanity that no longer remembers what human culture was, and trying to think about like what would survive and what things would still matter and what kind of cultures would exist if all that stuff was wiped away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, like I was telling Johnny, I finished reading this, read multiple Warheads, King City, and I was like, you almost approach you like you're writing from the world first, and then you place characters within it, and it's almost the world that they live in that kind of dictates the story, right?
It's the main character, yeah.
Yeah, almost like it's the main character, and I was like, it may not be that may not be your approach, but it almost feels like that. Like it's the world that kind of dictates where the story goes more than the characters do, right?
Yeah,
they're in this.
That's accurate.
Yeah.
I remember hearing people talking about Carl Barks' Scrooge McDuck comics, about how it almost felt like you were getting like this National Geographic style story of visiting other parts of the world. You'd be like, oh, they're discovering weird pyramids in South America now. What a cool Scrooge McDuck comic. And so I think that's one of the joys of making comics for me, is you get to like explore different places and really like think about what different environments are like. And that's a lot of times what I'll do is I'll read comics and try to write down what I enjoyed about them.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes it is that like really, there's a manga that I have up here, if I can find it, called The Walking Man. I've stashed it somewhere else, but there's a manga called The Walking Man, and it's like kind of this Akira style art style book, and it's just about a guy who does nothing with his day. Like he'll go out with his dog and find.
Oh yes, yeah. You made mention to it in one of your. I don't know if it was at the end of multiple Warheads or in one of your diary books, but you had made mention of that exact book. Yeah.
Yeah. I think in Rain Like Hammers, I did a backup.
Yeah, that must be it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it felt to me like it's like if you distilled comics down to elements, like the periodic table of things you could do in comics. It feels like a pure element of the Japanese call it a yashike, and it means like healing. And so they have this like genre of manga and anime that's like, people who go to their business jobs, all their jobs, and get really stressed out. They don't want to come back home and necessarily watch like Goku fighting Vegeta. It's like more stress in their life. So it's like this genre of entertainment that's just this is about a guy who's making coffee and goes and hangs out in his garden for a little bit that you can watch as escapism.
Almost like a meditative book,
Yeah. And I've been trying to incorporate more of that into my own work, which has been difficult because I have I grew up too much on action comics, and I'm always like, like against my own, like Multiple Warheads is an example of a book where I tried to make it very meandering and kind of break away from, like, when the time I made it, I was really kind of anti-story structure and wanted to just like make this exploratory book. And then by book 2, it turns into a heist. It's like it's inescapable.
Yeah.
I mean, it definitely has the feel good moments though. You got the little seal guy and his boyfriend, and like there's just some really touching scenes and moments in it that are just wonderful. Like that's why it's probably still my favorite work of yours, man. It's just warm, you know what I mean? Like even when it gets goofy and like they're fighting the ghosts in the submerged city and stuff like that, it is a little more punchy than the first, but it's still warm, you know what I mean? There's no other way to put it, you know what I mean? It's a feel good comic in the best sense of them, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean that's probably the best example of me making comfort comics I want to hang out in, because I would spend, I was really self-indulgent with that book. I would just spend weeks doing like 2 or 3 pages where the characters are just in a coffee shop and drawing the city with all the everything in the windows. Like that's an interesting thing with the contrast with Moonray, where I've tried to speed up much more with Moonray.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to be like more of a workman cartoonist, so it is less self-indulgent in my process, but I'm trying to still make it a fun read.
Yeah, but I mean the detail you put in your environments, though, and not just environments like in Rains Like Hammers. I clipped one because I loved it. The final spread that the book ends on.
Oh, right, where they're kind of pulling apart they're
I love it. Like, I mean, you just look at that in the ship, and it looks like robotic but organic at the same time. You have this kind of blending of the two, like a rigid, but it's still got a flow and an organic feel to it, even though you're doing like a robot or some kind of building. And I just love that kind of the mix of the two. It just gives for a unique look to like your sci-fi type stuff,
Oh, thanks. Yeah, when I was in my early 20s, I remember thinking that like I had a really hard time with doing anything technical because I thought it had to be all very sharp lines and everything. And then the late 90s had this cool aesthetic to it. I think back a lot where they were very excited about this. There was kind of this idea of the snowboard rave future that was just around the corner that never happened. and there's a couple there's a couple things that really visually capture that. Like there's a TLC video, or like the thing that Michael and Janet Jackson did in this spaceship called Scream, that has this like very circular windows thing. And I remember being obsessed with that and trying to incorporate that much more in my work. And I think it's stuck around where, that's a funny thing about turning into an old man is you're like, I have all these like 30-year-old references. I'm like, that's what the future looks like. That's the way the cool thing should look. And it's, it's a Junko jeans from never cool.
Yeah, for sure. Especially books that like you said, from 30 years ago that are like, this is 50 years into the future, and we get there and you're like, man, something they got, but other things they were way off, But we're getting closer to having self-driving cars. They might not be hovering, but they are.
Oh yeah, I've seen those cars in LA. I just had the question if someone was asking about the Jodorowsky thing.
Yeah.
The closest I ever got to interacting with Jodorowsky is when I worked for Kanye West briefly, which was a weird experience. And it's a weird memory, but I was hanging out with this guy named Elon that was like working for Kanye West Donda Company, and it was such a weird experience to have them show up in Vancouver when I was there and be like, do these weird jobs for Kanye West. That the way that the thing that kind of confirmed that I was not a crazy person, these people weren't trying to scam me, as I saw a photo of this guy Elon and Kanye West hanging out with Jodorowsky, and I was like, okay, it's real.
Yeah.
But
it would be great to see you do a book with Jordo, but I mean, I'm not sure about you working with the other writer, though. You know what I mean? I don't think it's necessary.
I don't know if it's even letting. I'm working. I have a script that that I've been going back and forth with J.H. Williams, actually. Him and his co-writer Scott have been talking to me about doing something, so I'm really excited to work with another. Because I've worked a couple times with writers. I did a one-shot Empowered issue with Adam Warren, and I did an issue of Wicked and Divine with Karen Gillan.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, the about the cat goddess.
Yeah, and it's funny because she was clearly Rihanna, and they're like, don't make her look like Rihanna, though.
Yeah. Let's see. You recently opened my. We have some comments from Doom Cloud. You recently opened my eyes to the world of comics. You have my eternal thanks for getting me into this world of this art world. There are some comics that are reinventing the space that I should keep my eyes on. So what comics are reinventing the space that he should keep his eyes on?
Oh man, there's a bunch. I mean, Matt Howarth is always a big go-to for me. Matt Howarth was a guy who started in heavy metal in the 70s and then did a bunch of really weird science fiction comics and things with kind of shifting realities. And recently, Cosmic Lion, a newer small press publisher, has started publishing some Matt Howarth stuff.
Cosmic, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We love Cosmic Lion's. That's a nice little imprint.
I've been really excited at the stuff they've been doing. I mean, there's lots of stuff in the past that really messes with the medium. I'm looking at my shelves now. Let's see. I mean, certainly things like Masamune Shiro is a really fascinating artist in how he kind of plays with the medium and does the guy who did Appleseed and Ghost in the Shell and all those things.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the guys are pretty. I'm pretty loud about like Mobius and Matt Howarth, and Phil Barlow is another guy I mentioned who did this book called Zooniverse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a folder on my computer which I used to do talks with, and it's basically I made a collection of things that you can only do in comics.
Oh,
Have you read any Atsushi Kaneko, Brandon?
I don't think so. What is that one?
He just put out Fantagraphics just put out his newest manga, Search and Destroy. It's kind of a retelling of Dororo by Tezuka.
Oh yeah, I have seen that. I have read that guy. It's the guy that did Bambi and the Pink.
Yeah.
The Pink Gun, yeah.
No, I like that guy's stuff a lot. It's really, that feels like that cool mix of it has a kind of a Western feel to some of the stuff, like his sound effects are all in English.
Yeah,
that is good stuff. And interesting, Fantagraphics has been doing some really interesting stuff recently.
Yeah.
They've been doing some really brilliant like European Disney comics that they've been bringing over. There was a silent one recently that was like Donald Duck fighting a bear or something. It was all beautifully painted.
He has a follow-up question here. On top of that, do you have any advice on how to start writing comics? Should I learn to draw? I'm not currently even at Stickman level. Or is it possible to write comics like movie scripts or something?
Yeah, that's how.
Yeah, I mentioned my friend Wyatt Kennedy earlier, who's doing that Knights comic, and he's someone that I met in Vegas when he was kind of attempting to be a screenplay writer, and we became friends and started talking over like how he would navigate moving over to comics, and it was a really interesting process because I thought he was a really good writer, but trying to get him to figure out how and he was familiar with comics, which is really helpful too. But I mean, I would say doing stick figure layouts is really helpful to kind of understand how the medium works. And even just like taking comics something I do to kind of keep myself excited about things is
that's a great one of our buddies, James Edward Clark, he's in the chats, and he worked on a title called Tales to Enlighten. And the writer would draw out scenes in Stickman just to try to give him a visual cue on what he's looking for.
I think it's really helpful because one of the complaints that artists working with writers always say is people ask them to draw the impossible sometimes, like multiple things happening in one panel. And if somebody has to draw that out themselves, then it at least gives you like a starting point.
It makes them realize, like, putting them in the shoes of the artist and kind of understanding what can go in or what can't fit into one panel and help lay it out. Yeah.
Like when I worked on Prophet too, I would do thumbnails with like little layouts for everyone. And then it was really interesting to see how the different artists I was working with would basically fix my layouts and make them better. Because for me, it was just like in a coffee shop, like this is what the page could look like. And then Yanni or Simon would look at it and be like, I can do better, And when I worked with Adam Warren on the Empowered one shot, he did layouts for everything initially. And so I feel like I learned a lot. Like one of the big things that in his work is it's really important that he showed characters' facial expressions when they're saying something.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah, he's great.
I wasn't doing that. I was showing the back of characters' heads. So sometimes what I would do is I would have word balloons come out, and the word balloons would have a picture of the character's face in them.
Yes. Rain Like Hammers, you do that a little bit with the little creature.
From Adam Warren's early work. And then he was like, I really like that. And I was like, oh, good, I stole it from you. So.
Yeah, it's cool. It's really cool. Yeah, it's a fun little technique to add their faces in it. And it's almost like a panel within a panel within a panel, right? It's kind of it's a fun little, it's playful, right? It just makes it more fun, more entertaining, quirky. It just adds another element to comics.
Yeah, and that's a really fun thing, like thinking about what can only be done in comics. Something that I did, sometimes it can almost be like a time-saving thing too, or just a weird, like in the first Moonray book, I did have a scene in there where I would do the sound effects with a brush on a different piece of paper sometimes. And in that one, there's a thing where for the sound effects, I just got a bunch of stock images of mouths screaming in black and white. And photoshopped them in, and it was actually quicker, but I think it's something I'm proud of because it was like weird and gives you a weird visual image as opposed to writing out like rawr,
Yeah, and it added to, because the creatures that show up on that bridge are very off-putting and like creepy and almost like body horror, right?
Yeah, the idea is that there's these robots that build things, and
And like the screaming is off-putting, right? Because look at how big the mouths are like wide open, and they're almost like they're gonna eat. They're so big it looks like they're almost gonna come over and chomp and eat them up, right? Bite them.
Right.
So yeah, it's a very intimidating kind of like in your face, and like you said, screaming with the mouths wide open, and it was, and you're reading it too, and you're like, okay, so. And also, you get to this page, and you're like, "Oh shit, what the fuck is this?" You know?
Yeah, collage is such a weird thing. The old Tank Girl comics use collage in really fun ways, and I remember being really surprised that like more people in kind of more digital age don't mess with it more.
Because with the digital, it's so much easier to play with, and you can kind of see the results and adjust it. You don't have to commit to like gluing something down with something else and drawing like you. It's a little easier to play around with it and learn from your mistakes a little more. And
yeah. In the second book, I can find my copy.
And you don't need, and with Photoshop, you don't need a Xerox machine. You know, you just go in, put a filter on it. You don't have to go to the Xerox machine and like get that kind of Xerox look. Or
there's fun things that I kind of miss about working with photocopies more. There's a thing where while you're photocopying something, if you move the paper, you can create this weird blur effect.
Okay.
It's almost like this action line thing.
Yeah.
So I might have to go back to Kinko's and do that for a future thing because I've messed with it a little bit on a scanner, but it's slightly different. I was just remembered another thing I did in the second Moonray book because I did a flashback scene, and something to show as a flashback I used photographs, like really old grainy 70s photographs for the skies in it. Nice. So the whole scene just kind of that's the cue of like just so you know this is a flashback. It's all.
It's always like a photo in the background, which cues up like so the reader knows that's a flashback.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a really fun thing about comics too. Is I feel like you can train the reader to read them a certain way. Like before when we were talking about kind of comics that really stretch the medium, like these are ones I look at a lot. This is Tom Herpick's books. He's got Cusp and White Clay. Tom Herpick's one of the main storyboard artists on Adventure Time that I became friends with back in New York years ago, and he has these are very close to kind of comic book poems. If you can see this one here, this is the thing where I feel like this is an example of him kind of training the reader how the comic can be read. So it has this open hand you can see in the first panel that says yeah. So basically, it's like your guts are like this, do this, and essentially. Like it's being flipped and what I'm looking at, but essentially the first panel is the fist closed, and it's like your guts are like this, like your guts are all tight and open them and do this, and then something that later on he just has the text that says do this, and suddenly the words in the pictures now mean the same thing, and it's like kind of combining them in a really cool way. Like that's kind of a simple example of it, but I think you can like you can use things in a comic book language where suddenly a visual. Like a visual can just mean a lot more. You know, like you have a big flashback of somebody who's, a childhood friend was murdered with a hammer, and then every time they're upset, you could have a little inset panel of a hammer shows up.
Okay. Meaning that's the trauma resurfacing, or
yeah, exactly. There's a lot of, or even like, and something I did in Multiple Warheads is, I tried to give every character a color scheme that was visual, that was shown in the sound effects for them. So there's this woman named Nura in it who's like a bounty hunter, and she has blue hair. So every time her motorcycle's driving around, it has a blue sound effect.
Cool.
Oh, someone's asked. So this is Thomas Herpick is the guy I was talking about. This Herpich.
That's awesome. I've noticed you've been doing some signings lately, like at shops and stuff. Do you have anything lined up coming up soon that people could go to go meet you, have some books signed? Is there anything? I know the winter months are a little. I see this all the time. Winter months are a bit slower. Convention, holidays, and stuff. So it's a little more quiet. But do you have anything coming up in the new year?
Nothing set planned. I'm gonna start some conventions this year. So
okay.
I went and looked. I checked out Las Vegas had a thing called Designer Con recently, which is a vinyl toy and print thing, and I was thinking it'd be really fun to. I met up with a friend of mine that actually the guys who did Wood Rocket that did the porn parody movies I worked on are now doing they do like weed paraphernalia and like
Okay.
dildos with jokes on them.
Okay.
But I was talking to those guys about like creating some cool products to sell at this like vinyl toy thing, and yeah, because they actually had a meeting. Are you familiar with the artist Rock and Jelly Bean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the
EPHK
reason
is a big fan, so he put us on to him.
Nice, yeah. He showed up in Vegas for that thing. So one of the reasons I went there was to meet him and give him a stack of my books. And my friends who do Wood Rocket also had a meeting with him, and they were trying to figure out ways to.
I have a quick question concerning Jellybean. Did he wear the luchador mask when you met him, or did he have it off?
Not only did he wear the luchador mask, as my friends that had a private like lunch meeting with him, he kept the mask on the entire time.
Did he?
Yeah, and they're telling me there's another guy, I think his name's Chuck Tingle, who does like kind of joke adult books.
Mm-hmm.
And he has, I'm not too familiar with him, but I know he has like a persona, like a fake voice that he does. And my friend had like a business call with him, and he kept the fake voice on the entire time.
The whole time? That's commitment, right?
Oh yeah, so I got to meet Rock and Jelly Bean, and I got the photo with him and Casey and my friend Filthy Rich that was visiting, and I bought this gigantic designer con print that he did, which is him drawing Las Vegas, which is really cool. And something I really enjoy is kind of a call and response of art. And so I was thinking, like, if I do a print for the next designer con, I almost want to do, because his is like a pretty girl in front of all the kind of classic Las Vegas strip stuff. And so I was thinking it'd be really fun living here, doing a response of drawing like a pretty girl with the kind of insider off the strip stuff that I've gotten to know living here. Like people are always surprised when I tell them like Las Vegas has 15 comic stores here.
Okay.
Like decent, like there's at least 6 really good comic stores that could be your.
Well, it's a fairly big city, Vegas. I mean,
yeah, but it's right. Like Portland is famous for being a big comic scene, and there's like maybe 6 comic stores there.
Serious?
Okay. I think so. And like Seattle, there's like 1 or 2 where I grew up.
Okay.
So it is really like I've never lived in a city, and there's something really surprising about spending the last year in LA. Is LA has got some great comic stores. You know, they have like Golden Apple is my favorite when I was living there,
mm-hmm.
and Secret Headquarters, and they have a bunch of really cool shops there. But I think per capita, Las Vegas has got the best comic stores of any city I've lived in.
Cool.
And they're 24 hours, right? Or
not the comic stores yet, but there's a manga store here called Manga Hole that I'm a big fan of, and they're open till like 10 p.m.
Okay.
Oh, cool. Is there a comic shop that has like, what do you call it? Cosplay costumes where you can go and get married at the comic shop in your favorite character's costume?
That would be cool. There's a taxidermy comic store here where they teach people taxidermy, and you go in there and
are you serious?
Yeah.
that is fucked up, man. That's weird.
You're kind of light on the comics. It's mostly like mainstream stuff. So I don't hang out there too much, but it just that it exists is so bizarre.
That is bizarre. That's so bizarre.
Yeah. Like I remember in LA, one of the things that kind of stuck in my craw, they have a comic store called Mega City One.
Okay. Kind of like Judge Dredd, Mega City.
Yeah, exactly. And I went in there to find Judge Dredd comics, and they didn't have any.
They didn't have any.
Yeah, and then Casey, my partner, is such a nerd that she was like, actually, LA would be Mega City 2. It's not in the right vicinity for Judge Dredd lore.
Yeah. Taxidermy and comics. Wow, that's a combination I would have never thought of.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Both technically collectibles, I guess.
Yeah. And it's interesting because years ago I was dating a girl that was into taxidermy, and I was like, I can't live with a taxidermy animal in the house. It's too much for me. So it's definitely not quite my scene, but I'm glad it exists.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And just going back to thinking about what comics are. Oh, I found here's that Walking Man book I was talking about earlier.
Ah, cool.
And also an aside, one of the best manga that I've really been into lately is this Go with the Clouds North by Northwest.
Okay.
And something that one of the books, I don't think it's this one, but one of the later books in it manages to show what tea tastes like. They have a thing where one of the characters goes to like this little tea house in Japan, and he's given this like really special tea, and he drinks it, and there's this kind of collage of like wind and rain and like a leaf that hits water, and it's an entire like 2-page sequence of what his experience is like drinking tea.
Visually explaining what the experience and the taste, the flavors, the sensations are.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a really
cool
cool example of something kind of stretching the boundaries of comics.
Yeah.
Yeah. Comic shops in Vegas are definitely my. I've never gambled here.
Yeah, I never found the interest, man. Like it.
Yeah.
Just,
Aside from playing poker once in a while with my buddies, like I don't buy lotto tickets. I don't like the whole. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I've played poker with friends, but that's the extent of it.
Yeah. And it's more for just to hang out, shoot the shit, and just, take jabs at each other. And, it's more about that. Yeah.
My friends were too good was the problem. Like I felt like I was getting sharp.
Well, see, we had like, it wasn't a cash game. We played tournament style.
Mm-hmm.
So you could only buy back within the first 2 blinds or something. So, like after the first 2 blinds, and you can just, you got the guys who are super aggressive and tries to, so we played that way. So it made it a little more fun, but
okay. That's good.
Yeah, if anybody's getting like those world tournament of poker guys, like, oh yeah, you're gonna raise on me, Well, yeah, like you just quit playing at that moment. You know what I mean? Like,
too aggressive.
Yeah, well, I mean, poker. I think we started playing when because hockey's obviously super popular here where I live, and when they shut the NHL shut down, what is it? About 8 years ago, they had the strike or whatever, so there's no more hockey. So all we did was like poker games and UFC. So we'd pay the pay-per-view, get a bunch of guys together, play some poker, watch the UFC, and we'd make like our Saturday nights would be that. So
that's fun.
Yeah, it is fun. It was fun.
Yeah,
just hang out instead of going to the bar or whatever. We just all hang out together at one guy's house. Someone would make a bunch of food and just just a fun time.
That was for a few years too, right? Like, because they shut the whole league down until the contracts ran out for that thing, right?
Well, it's they had to renegotiate with the Players Association, so yeah, they shut everything down.
That was something that really surprised me about living in Canada is how everyone is into hockey. Like in the States, I feel like there's this huge division between like if you're into Star Trek, you're not into football, but in Canada, like the most severe comic nerds I knew would like have full hockey gear on and be really excited about the game coming up, and it was very alien to me. Yeah,
it's true. Like sport, like jock, like that prototypical, like you're a jock, you're a nerd, you're like it kind of blurs a little bit. Like, and I didn't grow up. I grew up in a small town where that's even more apparent, right? In a smaller town where it's more segregated, you don't get that kind of mixing of the cultures as much. But even in the small towns I grew up in, it was pretty diverse and mixed. And so
I wonder what that is, or why it's more common to be into sports of all kinds in Canada versus the States.
I don't know. Maybe it's the winters. It just people, we're stuck inside all winter. So when we get out, we're like, make the best of it. We don't have time to fucking, we got to experience as much as we can when the weather's nice.
Totally. And I grew up in Seattle, which I think is, at least when I was a teenager, it felt like the least sports town imaginable.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly what I said, James. Long winters inside sucks. So, Yeah,
totally. I wonder if does that have more of a reading culture, you think?
Oh, for sure. I mean, what do you do? Either if you don't have a girlfriend, what are you going to do? I mean, you spend those long winters. I mean, I'm sure pregnancies, a lot of pregnancies happen during the winter months when you're stuck inside and,
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Or in the spring when everyone gets out. But those are maybe more unwanted pregnancies, maybe mistakes, accidents.
Do you have access to much to the French Canadian comic scene where you're at?
Yeah, because I live in near Montreal, so
That's such an interesting pocket because it seems like there's some really fantastic cartoonists out of there, but from my knowledge, it doesn't seem like there's a crossover with the French comic scene. But
Well, you have Front Froid, which is a publisher here in Quebec, and I think they have a deal with Oni because you have Cab, who put out U-Town, and she puts her comic out with Front Froid in French, and the English version is printed by Oni.
Okay.
And you have Salle Noir, who does the same thing.
Nice.
They do with Oni and then Front Froid, so there is some not as much as you'd think maybe, but there is some crossover between like English and publishers.
I think he meant like it being released in Europe though by like a French publisher.
Oh,
I mean, that's even better. The fact that I can read it in English is more because I remember going to TCAF one year and meeting some French Canadian cartoonists and just being like it felt like kind of like a walking through the Looking Glass Alice in Wonderland thing where I was like, there's a whole.
Well, if ever you have a chance, come to Montreal the end of May, I believe. Beginning of June is the same version, the like TCAF but for Montreal, BDM Montreal. It's like, and now what they do is they close off one of the main streets in downtown for 6 blocks, and it's all outside. It's a strip that you just walk up and down, and all the creators are lined up with their booths, and it's like an outdoor festival, and it's really cool. Like it's really fun, and the turnouts have been massive.
Oh, that's really cool.
Like it's tripled, quadrupled since they've been doing it that way.
Oh yeah, EPHK is saying a lot of Quebecer artists get it because he's initially Canadian if I remember right.
Yeah, he's initially from around the Montreal area. Yeah,
and then escaped to Europe.
Yeah.
Lucky guy. Yeah.
Yeah, he's been traveling around too. He went to Japan and Germany. Was he in Germany for a while? Now he's back in France, I believe.
Last I heard, talked to him, he was in France. Yeah, just did 300 pages, man, for Harpy. Can't wait to read it, man.
Oh yeah, Harpy. I've been slowly making my way through his new book Harpy, and it's like
you got to check it out.
Yeah. I've been talking. I've been talking to some friends about his work a lot because it's like he's such a solid. Like he put out. I'll butcher the name, but
Mart Vallis.
Yeah, this beautiful book here.
Yeah,
Vallis. Yeah, and it's all written in like this, his made up alien language.
Yeah.
He wrote a note to me on the back of this one that's like he wrote a little to me thing, and I've yet to translate it.
Okay.
But but to read his, I mean, this is an impressive thing that and Image put out a version of this that people can track down too.
Yeah.
But, just how well this works without any of the. It's funny. There's some sound effects in English, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
But his new book being kind of like a South African future cop story and having dialogue and narration is such a. It's so cool to see what a good writer he is.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I really like we got a hold of his adult comics, Magda Gamma, and we really enjoyed those too. Yeah.
We did the first volume. Now we have to we're planning on doing it. We had the friend that we had doing it with us, she's been MIA for a while for personal reasons, and so we're waiting for her to come back to do the second volume of that. We're supposed to do another episode on that one.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, Nick's a good friend of the show. I found him on Kickstarter and backed Mart Vallis because it looked like your work, to tell you the truth. I saw that logo and I saw like the picture that he had up on Kickstarter. And I'm like, man, that looks like Brandon Graham.
I'll check this out because I think he's certainly one of my favorite artists.
Yeah, I know Patrick Kidlin's been trying to get him to do his Girl with Guns book that he wants to do. And I was
talking to Patrick about his stuff, and we were both talking about how crazy it is that he's not like blowing up more gigantic as it is. Like I feel like as soon as people catch on to his work, it's going to be we're going to it's going to be bragging about we knew him when.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. The thing about Patrick is he doesn't do the same thing that all the other punk rockers do. He doesn't just try to write Grant Morrison books. He like is legitimately trying to be a real comic book writer. And I got my props from him. He's doing a book now that's about the sport of curling, which is very interesting, man. Like, he sent us a preview of it. And like I was just like, I want more of this. After reading Stringer, I want more. I want to see where this goes, Pat. Man, it looks so good.
Patrick's really interesting, and that like he's really obsessed with craft. And yeah, like you said, it's not. Although I will say I have come around on Gerard Way's work because I've been reading this Paranoid Gardens book.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So he's the other rock star that I'm like okay,
Yeah, legit.
rock star
Some
in the
chops there. Yeah.
I like how much it would probably upset Patrick that we're calling him a rock star, but he does get on stage.
We've had him on a couple of times, and I've rubbed it into him. He gets it. He knows. He understands. Like he plays shy to look cool, but like dude, he's awesome. You know what I mean?
You could put him in front of a mic and pick any subject matter, and you can have a conversation for an hour with him about anything, So
both times we've had him on, like he's gone over the time limit that he set for us, and then had to hang up because, like, oh wait, I gotta go because like once you see him going, like he just goes, man.
Yeah, his newsletter is like where I get a lot of my comic news these days because he'll break down things and like there'll be just some weird online drama and he'll break it down in this sane way, which is
true. Yeah, he does. He has what he's been doing, like whether he's touring, he does like what a movie, and he does his comic section. And he won't shy away from touching on touchy subject matter of things that have been going on in the comics community and stuff like that. And like you said, he breaks it down in a extremely objective, like coming from a neutral viewpoint and really trying to give it to you kind of in the most sane, like objective way possible, right? And it's refreshing instead of these knee-jerk reactions that people have. And like a lot of the time it's like everyone's reading headlines and they don't dig into the actually what happened. They just see a headline and they make like rash decisions based on just a headline, and it's weird how people react that way. I just find it bizarre.
And I think I mean, especially with comic books, I often joke about how comics handle things dumber and worse ways than most of the communities. Just like the online culture sometimes can get so weirdly removed from reality because everybody has like their clicks and like, so it is really helpful to have like a voice of reason to kind of rein things in and explain them. And it's always fascinating how much drama there is in comics. Because
it's like people act like you have to be enemies. No, okay, someone did something and you could be like, okay, that's a shitty thing they did.
Sure.
Or I don't agree with that, but does it really mean you have to destroy a person's life or try to because they did something you don't agree with? Or it's like these extremes. And I find social media has created such a large divide, and the extremes have become even more extreme because of social media, because on both sides you get all these people that group. It's easier for them to find each other and group together, so they become and the voice just on top of another voice, and it just
echo chamber.
It's like an echo chamber. It just gets out of control. It's insane.
It's very fascinating because I feel like in reality, like like I go to a lot of comic stores and I've never, like, all of the interactions that I have when I run into people in comic stores, when I just get into conversations with retailers and other comic readers, it's always positive. It's like sometimes people are like, oh, this guy's way too into Aquaman or whatever, but but it's like there's a camaraderie about being like, oh, we all love growing up on Ninja Turtles, we can all talk about how weird it is to try to parse out Cerebus or whatever. And only online is there this division where people are like, you love what I love, but from a different camp. I hate you forever,
Yeah. And it's like, I don't know. Yeah, it's like black and white, never any gray. It's like, fuck.
Yeah. Man. Oh, it's easy to get caught up in. It's kind of a fascinating thing. I remember years ago, I think it's I'm when Before Watchmen was coming out, I was really vocally against all the people doing that, because for me it felt like kind of crossing a picket line. And I went to this convention in Italy, and Brian Azzarello was there, and I shook his hand, and he immediately pulled his hand back, and he's like, I can't believe I shook your hand, you're so rude to me. And it was very interesting to me to meet a real person, because I really respect him as a writer. I just think it was an idiot thing to do. So it was interesting to talk to someone in person and be like, oh no, I totally disagree with that as a move, but it doesn't mean that you're not a person.
Or all the work you did that I loved before. It doesn't negate any of the things you accomplished previously. Just because you did something that I think is like exceptional, and then something happens like 5 years later where you're like, oh, well, what I found exceptional 5 years ago, now I'm saying it's shit. It's like, it makes no fucking sense.
Well, yeah, everybody's forgotten about before Watchmen for the most part, but 100 Bullets is going to live forever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, so I don't know, and maybe that's something because I was probably too hostile at that point. So these days I do try to be a little less, a little more gracious about.
Yeah.
The before Watchmen graphic novels that they did, Doom Cloud, like it was a bunch of Brian Azzarello did the Comedian and Rorschach. Darwin Cook did the Minutemen. I forget who they had. What's his name? Jay Lee did the Ozymandias book. They basically did like a bunch of graphic novels that were prequels to the Watchmen.
Right, and yeah, my issue with it was that Alan Moore had said that he didn't want people to be doing more Watchmen stories. And so for me, it was very confusing because it was like it felt like it was comic creators that were going against the wishes of another comic creator to do work for a corporate comic. And for me, it was like, if you love Watchmen, then I assume you're a fan of Alan Moore, so you wouldn't want to be a dick to Alan Moore.
So you respect his wishes.
Yeah, because I don't really like Watchmen. I should qualify. Like, I'm a Dark Knight Returns guy. Like,
but also, like, Watchmen was a corporate comic. You know, whether people want to believe it, it's not like he released it as some indie treasure that, like, he wrote it for DC. You know,
right, and it's definitely like trying to subvert corporate comics. There's a bunch of stuff about Alan Moore that's really confusing to me because I feel like he has so many options. Like, but he just does like, I forget, like he's doing kind of crossed comics now and things like that. And I'm always like, surprised that he does what he makes, the choices he makes, but it's always easier to armchair quarterback another person's career rather than your own. And you know, it's I don't get to be Alan Moore, so I shouldn't sit here and be like what I would do if I was that brilliant.
Well, I appreciate him, but like he is so vocal bashing other people that I don't have a problem pointing out when I think he's at fault. And I think with a lot of his complaints about him working for DC and DC doing what DC does is kind of uninteresting, you know what I mean? Like it's
you got to kind of know what end of the pool you're getting into.
I mean, he was already a name by then. He could have, like, Comico would have did the Watchmen. Caliber would have put out the Watchmen. You know, if he wanted to like be an indie guy, he could have probably went back to UK and put that out with Pat Mills somewhere. You know what I mean? But like he decided to do it with DC, and DC does what DC does. And when they have the greatest graphic novel ever, fuck yeah, they're making sequels to it. They're making toys for it, boy.
Yeah, like, it's funny because he always seemed to try to navigate against that, but also get the money, which I understand. And like it always seems like such a comedic thing that he went over to do stuff for Wildstorm, and then Wildstorm was immediately sold back to DC, and he's in the middle of work. So I understand his frustration. Like I don't think more.
Don't get Johnny started with Wildstorm.
Yeah. And they had some great. Like I still argue that the Wildstorm did some like what's the book, the Warren Ellis book he did with
Authority.
Hitch and Neary, The Authority, like that I think for a long time I was like, that is the last time that the superhero comics kind of subverted themselves and moved on to something else. I think All-Star Superman did that afterwards too. Like that one I really like as well. But
I loved Wildstorm. Like I will shit on Jim Lee till the day I die for selling that company, man.
I think what is it, 4 episodes in a row now? I think we've had Johnny bash Jim Lee for selling Wildstorm.
Well, it's really frustrating to me because
I'm gonna keep a scorecard to see how many episodes we go in a row.
Right. From my point of view, I loved working on Prophet and loved the idea to dip into this thing. And I would, if I could relaunch anything, like Gen 13 or Wildcats would be the most fun things I think to play with.
To tell you the truth, man, like I as bad as like. I am making fun of Jim Lee selling. Matt Rosenberg's Wildcats book that came out last year was really good, man. It's probably the best superhero comic he's written. That's actually, if you want to read a really strong, really fun Wildcats character that actually plays a little with Gen 13 because Fairchild's in it too. I really like what he did with her character as well. So
nice. Yeah. I remember that was another thing I liked about the Authority is that Grunge showed up as he was like just like a hookup with one of the superhero characters.
Yeah.
Because back in my old, I did a sketchbook called Walrus, and I did like kind of my rough pitch for what I would do with Gen 13 in that. And I took out all the male characters, Burnout and Grunge, and I replaced them with Brainiac 5 and Static Shock.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, and there's some other runs of Wildcats. I don't know. I'd love to see like a Grant Morrison, Frank Quietly take on on like reworking Wildcats, because I know there was the Ellis thing years ago, but it felt like the couple issues I read felt a little bit like they were. You remember when Morrison did X-Men and they had the characters in the black costumes and it's got Wolverine talking about how he doesn't like the superhero costume?
Yeah.
It just felt like kind of silly to me, because I was like, Wolverine likes dressing like Wolverine. Don't lie to us.
Are you talking about when he did the Wildstorm thing for DC? I thought that was actually like the last really strong thing he did, aside from maybe in what was Injection? Was that the thing that he did with Declan Shelby at Image? That was kind of a throwback to his Vertigo stuff. That was pretty fun too.
Oh yeah.
I think it was the Injection. Yeah,
it was Chris Burnham, but maybe I'm thinking of a different book.
Let's see. We got another question for you, Brandon. Did you see the Nice House on the Lake? What do you think about Martinez's work in that?
Nice House on the Lake. Let me look that up, because I keep thinking of
that's
books.
the Tinian book.
Yeah, it's a DC horror thing that James the Fourth wrote.
I've never read a James Tinian book. I don't try. All right, that's the thing I always say. Is a horrible thing to say out there. I always say all writers are guilty until proven innocent, and I have yet. At some point, I will read. Like, it's funny. Years ago, I used to run into Scott Snyder at conventions a lot. He's the sweetest guy, and I always had this thing of like, I don't want to read his work and hate it, and then have to look him in the eye and be nice to him in the future. And years later, I read his Batman, and I think his Court of Owls is really good. But there's
it was all right.
Yeah. At some point, if I end up on an airplane with a James Tinian comic, I'll read it. But
yeah.
I recommend an older one he did called The Woods. That's kind of up your alley, a little kind of emotional, kind of a sci-fi fantasy type thing. It's kind of like
horror a lot.
Yeah, that's kind of been his thing since he did the Something's Killing the Children.
Okay. Yeah, because I liked what did I read a bunch of the Lock and Key comics recently by Stephen King's son. His name was
Joe Hill.
Joe Hill, yeah, and that was a comic I was really trepidatious to read. I was like, I don't know if this is going to be good. It's a child of an author doing outside of comics, doing comics, and I was really blown away by how impressive it was.
Yeah, for a Nepo baby, he's talented, man. Definitely.
Yeah.
And he had a great collaborator, I think. Who's the artist on that?
Oh yeah,
his name now. Too. Yeah, he great at scripting the story, right? For Joe Hill and the way it's. I think they worked super well together. And
yeah,
he was really fun.
Sorry, what was that?
I just think they're a great team together. Like he interprets the script really well from Joe Hill, and I mean, when you get two creators that just connect well, I mean, and they do good work, it's a great thing to just to read and take in. So,
and Lock and Key is a really interesting example of like, I think it exists in like 3 things, right? Like, because there's an audiobook for it, a TV show, and a comic book.
Yeah, it's gotten the treatment.
Yeah, and I think all versions of it are good, which is I don't know if you can say about many. Like, there's interesting things like I thought the Preacher TV show was better than the comic in some ways, but I think if you were a huge fan of the comic, the show you wouldn't like as much.
Yeah. That's kind of my problem.
Yeah. But I enjoyed the TV show. Like, Johnny's not a big fan, but I was like, I really enjoyed a lot of the.
I thought the casting,
especially exactly. The performances were great. I thought
it's always a funny defeat too when there's a thing outside of comics. Like, I think the Constantine movie is better than most Constantine comics.
I really enjoyed the Constantine movie.
I love the movie. I love the comics, and I like that the movie is so removed that like you can't. It's not like they ruined anything special from the comics, aside from them taking him having cancer from one arc. But they even did their own thing with that. It was so.
Adaptations are a weird thing, right? So,
and I'm happy they're doing a sequel to it too. I hope they don't fuck that up, man. Like,
yeah. Hopefully, it's a good one. Adaptations are weird. It's interesting. And next to me, I've got all this list. I've got all these old ElfQuest books, like these.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of these is just talking about how much they were trying to take ElfQuest turn it into animation and do all these different, like here you can see the Wendy and Richard Penny on the cover.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm kind of glad that it was never adapted into anything because it works so well as a comic book.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's really hard to imagine what they could do with it.
She tried for like 50 years to get that damn thing adapted, right? Or close to it.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and it's interesting because like above that, I've got my shelf of Mobius books, and Mobius stuff. Like I feel like Tron might be the best Mobius adaptation because I saw recently that like there's a director that got the Incal made, and it's felt insane to me that it wouldn't be a Jodorowsky movie.
Yeah, that is weird because like he has gone back to filmmaking. Like the movies that he's made since he's come back are like, I don't know, they're like he's not like being super weird in them, but yeah,
that makes sense. It's got to be hard to be like I often think about how Jeff Darrow's painted himself in an interesting corner where he has to be the detail guy now.
Okay. Yeah.
And Jodorowsky has. If you go see a Jodorowsky movie and it's like a fun romantic comedy, you'd probably feel a little robbed.
I don't know if I like that.
I don't like that. Delete that comment from the chat.
Well, if it's true, it's true. But like, I'm not sure if I'm excited for that at all. I do like Taika Waititi. I think he has his place in cinema, but I don't think him doing something like the Incal is.
No.
He's got to do it way different than he did his Marvel movies, man.
Yeah, it's gonna turn into dick and fart jokes the whole movie or some shit. I don't know. I think he's lost kind of that balance, you know, that he had in his earlier work that worked so well. And I think he's kind of the thing that got him popular. I think he's leaning too hard on that now in his movies, you know,
it's hard to be the king, right?
Yeah.
like I really like he did. Was it Brown Bunny?
Jojo Rabbit. Brown Bunny is Vincent Gallo.
That's right. Yeah. Jojo Rabbit I thought was fantastic, and then like the Marvel movies I can click with. But
yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've never seen Taika Waititi try to do a big epic because I mean, like, the Incal is basically Mobius and Jordo's Dune. You know what I mean? That is what they went with the stuff that they came up with for like Jordo's Dune that never ended up happening, and I think that I would like to have gotten like a big spectacle director. I mean, like I know Denis Villeneuve, he's already done Dune, but like somebody like him, like Taika Waititi, like I guess you can call the Thor movies big epics, but I mean they're fucking silly. There's no heart to them. You know what I mean, really?
Yeah. Oh, kind of as an aside, I just recently found something I watched the other day that was really fun. Is the Salvador Dali collaboration with Disney. They did like this animated like surrealist short that's like 6 minutes long. You can find on YouTube.
Wow,
just such a weird, and it looks really Disney, and it has like the melting clocks and weirdness.
That's crazy.
I always think of the Incal as like it's like Jodorowsky trying to take all the weirdness of Mobius and like gel it into a solid plot. But I still prefer Mobius's personal work, and I think the one collaborative thing that I hold as high as his own work is when he did the Long Tomorrow with Dan O'Bannon, you know, the writer of Alien.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that one is just this kind of short detective story. It's such a brilliant Mobius comic.
I'm gonna be cheesy, man. I'm a big Arzak fan. You know what I mean? And I don't know. Maybe Zack Snyder could do a really cool Arzak, just all in slow mo with him just flying around on like that.
There's some fun, kind of bad Arzak videos you can find on YouTube that are just like flash animated things from the early 2000s. And the Hennessy, the director of Gladiator, did a Hennessy commercial, which is like the best Mobius fan commercial imaginable.
That's cool. Yeah, I think the Gardens of Edema stuff could be done pretty good on film. Like all the stuff about Atan and Still, like that all kind of has a nice narrative to it. I particularly like the third book, Goddess. I thought that was very fun. Oh, you got the old fucking Marvel publications of them. Cool.
Yeah. I have on the Mobius shelf here. I even have if I can find it. I kept a bunch of 80s interviews with him when Marvel was pushing his stuff out here. It has a bunch of photos of Mobius just hanging out on a beach, which I always thought was cool. Yeah, so it's ancient interviews I've got with Mobius. There's a there's a unauthorized Mobius book of interviews that's being kicked around lately that I saw an early PDF of. Because this thing came out, the Mr. Mobius and Dr. Gurr book, or
Okay.
Dr. Mobius and Mr. Gurr from Dark Horse. And my understanding was this got pretty edited down by his widow.
Okay.
And so this other guy went and interviewed a bunch of Mobius's friends and family, and got this like kind of messier version of his life that he's been shopping around. I feel like my stuff doesn't really. I've messed around. I saw the question about a King City adaptation thing.
Yeah.
I messed around. I made a science fiction pilot that I've talked about a little bit, and I have the okay now to release it somehow. So maybe on like the Living the Line channel, we might put out the first pilot I did of a science fiction that me and my friend Leroy did together. It's like a live action spaceship thing called The Emperor of the Known Universe.
Okay.
But I feel like I worked a little bit in like I did an Adventure Time episode and worked a little bit in animation and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm kind of the mind like I feel like if you adapted my stuff to other mediums, it would kind of lose something. And also, nobody's really when people used to hit me up to do profit adaptions. I was just being a dick sometimes, and I would send them the trailer for Your Hunter from the Future, which is like a 70s Italian space barbarian movie, and I'd be like, "This already exists. We don't need a profit movie."
Yeah. Well, who knows? Maybe one day, like the right person will come to you and pitch it in a way that you're like, holy fuck. Like,
I never thought about a live action adaptation, but the idea of seeing somebody kickflip a cat, I kind of want to see it now.
Yeah, I mean, it worked out. Like Scott Pilgrim, I think, worked out well as a movie.
I love the way they made that movie and how they kind of incorporated like comic book, not exactly comic book aspects, but like it really felt like a comic book that came to life, not just an adaptation of a comic,
Sure.
but really trying to bring, without it being animated, right? Live action, but make it feel like a comic, which I think they pretty much accomplished, right?
Yeah, that was my impression. I didn't watch that movie for years because I was working with a art school. There was a comic student who I got hired to kind of be his mentor or whatever by the school. And I would go through his comics with him and talk about it. And he would every week he'd be like, "Did you watch the Scott Pilgrim movie yet?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, I read the comic." And he'd be like, "What about yet? Have you watched it?" And I was like, "No, I don't." And I think it became kind of a game of how much I wasn't going to. And then like a decade later, I finally was like, I guess I should watch it.
I think that movie comes to a good reason why like I kind of don't want to see King City adapted, because like Scott Pilgrim, they changed the ending so sharply, you know what I mean? And I think that they would have to do that with King City, because I don't think that any studio. I love the ending of King City.
I see what you mean.
Fuck it, let's just go home. It's not our problem, you know what I mean? And I know any studio with their salt would have them go fight the big Cthulhu monster in the city, you know what I mean? And not have them go home. And I think that the adaptation would be lesser for it, you know what I mean, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I mean, maybe things are different because I feel like Adventure Time really changed my mind on what's possible in big budget stuff, because I always stayed away from animation because I was like, everything would get tweaked and made worse and everything. And then I felt like Penn Ward managed to make Adventure Time into like something cool and personal and weird, and it kind of changed the culture. So maybe it's possible, but
yeah, maybe not as a movie, but as a series, right, where it's episodic instead. So you don't really need that ending, like a movie has to have the ending, right? So
yeah. Doomcloud made a good point about adaptions being distinct enough from the source material.
Yeah, there's for sure. You don't want it to be
fun to adapt something.
Yeah.
When the Prophet, there was an announcement a couple years ago for a Prophet live action thing, and I immediately emailed Liefeld and was like, I want to do the comic adaptation of it. He just never wrote me back. I was like, all right.
Yeah.
Because it would be. Did you ever see the Howard the Duck adaptation that Kyle Baker did?
The 80s flick? Or
yeah. So the movie had a Kyle Baker comic adaptation, and the comic I think is better than the movie because it's Kyle Baker drawing it.
Okay.
I did
Dick
see
Tracy
that.
too. And there's a funny story with the Dick Tracy one where Warren Beatty's was really specific about how he wanted to be shown in the Dick Tracy comic. So I think, if I remember the story where Kyle Baker got one face of him approved, and he just photocopied it every time Warren Beatty Tracy showed up.
That's hilarious. Oh, and he still owns the rights to that. I found out, man. Like he will not let Dick Tracy go. Like
Warren Beatty. I wish Kyle Baker owned the rights, but yeah.
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 It's the thing where
He hasn't done much in a long time. I haven't seen him since Circuitry Breaker at Image, man. Like he was kind of a big deal when I was a kid. He was doing King David and Cowboy Wally show and all that.
There's a story that got, I think it was a Dean Haspel story where he talked about 80s Kyle Baker seeing him on the subway in New York, and he had a Spider-Man page leaned up against the window of the subway, and he was inking it on the way to the Marvel office.
Yeah, I guess it works like a
yeah. But if I remember right, Kyle Baker did a Kickstarter book in the last couple of years. It looked really cool.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that's the difficulty about there kind of not being like it does feel like comics is kind of like scattered right now.
Okay.
Like kind of disparate all over.
Well, there's a lot of stuff on Kickstarter, right? Comic wise. So
yeah, totally.
It's like trying to keep up with TV shows now with all the streaming services. You know what I mean? Like that's comic books is even worse, though. You know what I mean? Like not knowing that your favorite guy puts something out because
I had kind of a fantasy of a website where you could go and just click on any cartoonist name and be like, "What's their newest book? What have they been working on?"
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. I mean, do a search, like, yeah.
Have you ever seen,
follow? Yeah.
Have you ever seen this? There's a website called Mike's Amazing World of Comics.
I've heard of it. I've never. Yeah.
Yeah, on the website you can actually click a month and a year. And I don't know if I can put it in the chat, but yeah, Mike's Amazing World of Comics. You just click the month in the year, and it shows you everything that's on stands that month, and it's really fascinating to go through and like be like, what was on stands the year I was born, and for me, I used it to kind of go back to my earliest memories of comics, and just like find the Richie Rich comics and things like that they were coming out.
Yeah, like it just things you forgot about, right? It just reboots the memory.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that kind of touching on different comic artists and everything. It's like, because I always find, I'll go through a bunch of quarter bins and find weird old comics, and it's really fascinating to track somebody's career, what happened afterwards. Like recently, I dug out an old box of David Hahn comic called Fun and Perils in the Trudyverse. It's like an Antarctic Press. It was kind of like, it was like a Texas version of Love and Rockets. That's how I was describing it to a friend. And then I dug around on what David Hahn's career had happened since then. And he did like Bite Club with Howard Chankin over at Vertigo, and did all these other comics that are. So it is kind of cool to discover people retroactively and then dig through their whole career.
Did Bite Club? I know that book. I'm well big time Vertigo junkie, so yeah.
Oh, nice. How do you feel about Vertigo coming back?
Man, if they're gonna just keep all the Black Label books and they're gonna be putting out like a bunch of Batman shit on Vertigo, don't bother. Just keep calling it Black Label. If they're actually gonna make Vertigo again and like do it like how Vertigo was, and maybe find like a publisher,
CO or
somebody like Karen Berger actually run it. You know what I mean? Like go for it. But if it's just gonna be Jim Lee and Dan Didio or whoever, I know Dan Didio doesn't work there, but whoever the new Dan Didio is with Jim Lee, and they're just gonna be putting out Batman and Superman meets the Authority books and call it Vertigo books, don't bother.
Yeah, I think they have to go full goth. I think they need to go Hot Topic in the 2000s and just have like Winona Ryder with a black umbrella or something on the cover of every book.
I mean, like it wasn't all that. You had like Ted McKeever doing like really grungy stuff with Peter Milligan, and there was a lot to Vertigo, but it is known mostly like how you said Image is Spawn and Walking Dead. Vertigo has the whole Sandman, Why the Last Man thing, and like there is so much more to it than those books, but like that's just what people know.
Yeah, but I'd be interested in if they lean it, because it's also weird now because we're getting Heavy Metal and Metal Hurlant are both coming out again. So we have all these, like with that and Vertigo, we have all these old things where people have this idea of, and I'm really fascinated, like can they hold up the legacy without the original crew that made it what it is? And I feel like you really, like with Vertigo, they really have to either break new talent or take some old guy that nobody's that familiar with and have an entirely new book by them, like almost like a Tarantino, what the artistic equivalent of what Tarantino did with John Travolta, and like put out a new Tim McKeever book that feels unlike anything we've seen from him.
I saw the lineup for the new first issue of Metal Hurlon, and it's all just a bunch of established guys in American comics. There's like no Euro guys. There's nobody really interesting to it. You know what I mean? It's all just
It's always funny when they're just be like, look, we got whoever's the artist on Aquaman right now, and that's as good as Richard Corbin. You know, it doesn't really silly.
Yeah.
So I was like looking at that on Kickstarter, and I'm like, ooh, Metal Hurlon. They're actually calling it by the original title. And I went and looked at it, and I'm just like, this is not exciting at all.
Yeah. Although I will say the new Penthouse books have been really they're not.
Yeah, they got our boy EPHK to do the cover of issue 1.
Yeah, totally. And here's Luana's cover. I did some stuff in these, but the interiors of these, it's really deceptive, I think. Have you read many of the issues?
Haven't had the chance to pick one up.
So it's not really that adult. It's a bunch of, like, Gillian March is in these.
Okay, Gillian,
Yeah, so it's a bunch of European, kind of R-rated European comics being translated. And so it's like heavy metal without science fiction, but they're good comics.
So basically Penthouse is like Metal Hurlant then.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think that from my point of view, that's the point of how heavy metal and Metal Hurlant and all that is taking European works and translating them and putting them out cheaper than buying like a big hardcover. Because in the 90s, you could get like heavy metal would put the entirety of a French graphic novel in one book for $5, and it was pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Well, last I saw, heavy metal was still kind of running Inky Bilal's newest stuff. Like I read Julia and Rome and heavy metal and stuff like that, and Animals, because nobody was putting out the hardcover. Like I don't know why his stuff doesn't sell over here. He's like one of the most incredible talents the world's ever seen, but America just can't fucking get their heads around liking guy with a weird name, I guess. But
yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that has to be sold a certain way. I feel like kind of like an inroad to. I've been talking to the artist Matt Howarth a little bit. He's one of my favorite cartoonists, and I keep talking to him about how to, Cosmic Lion's publishing stuff now, but I really want him to do reprints of his old weird stuff, and kind of talking about how I think there would be a huge audience for his stuff if people found an inroad connection to his stuff first. So I think bringing Europeans over, there's that element too. Like you have to figure out who you're selling it to and how you're going to sell it to them. Yeah, I was talking to the Living Line guys about how we all pronounce Mobius different because they go with the French Moebius, and it's too stuck in my head.
Well, like when I hear everyone say Tintin, it sounds so foreign to me because I'm French, so it's Tintin.
Yeah.
Right? It's so whenever I hear anyone say like an English person,
Tan.
Yeah.
Tintin, I'm like
nails on a chalkboard.
Yeah, it's like I'm so used to Tintin, even when I speak English, it automatically switches over. So
Sure. Yeah. And
I even Metal I can't even pronounce it.
I know you know how it's pronounced.
Yeah, Metal Hurlant, so I'm like, I just can't do it. It just there's a mental block.
Truly American, and like Mark Miller's name, I purposely mispronounce.
Yeah,
because I call him Mark Millar whenever I'm talking about him in the comics or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, because that's how he says his name, so I just say it like he says it. I'm Mark Millar.
His thick accent. Because for me, it's like it's like. I think there's another artist who calls her who used the name, like her actual last name is Kirby, but it's just like you don't get to be Miller or Kirby. We have those guys; those names are set.
Thanks for tuning in, man. Have a good weekend.
Thanks for all the questions. It's been very much appreciated.
Oh yeah.
And we're kind of going over 2 hours. Brandon, you have something coming up, and not too long from now. Do you need us to wrap it up soon, buddy?
Oh yeah, sure. I should. I'm doing a fun thing tonight. I set up a friend of mine we've been doing these parties where we show up and do life drawing while we watch horror movies.
Okay, nice. I thought you were going to say I set up these parties where we do life drawing on a porn set of people fucking.
Well, it's a bunch of porn girls that show up and do the modeling.
Okay.
When I was in LA, there was this thing where they would hire there's this photographer, Alan Amato, who I met through Jim Mahfood, is a friend of his, and he would set up a thing where he was photographing all these models and porn girls and everything, and they'd all gather together and pitch in money to get like Riley Reid or something to pose, and then all these cartoonists would come out and draw them. And it was occurring to me like, oh, I can do that without paying people, because I can just bully my friends that are professional pretty ladies to show up and it's been funny because we've got many more models than artists, so it's just usually me and this other lady Ashley who does portraits of people, and then they just watch horror movies. But it's a fun thing to do with my evenings, and it makes it kind of like life drawing is always good to kind of keep the drawing muscles good.
What movie are you guys watching tonight? Just wondering.
We do a fun thing where we all show up with a different movie recommendation, and then we watch the trailers and vote. And
okay,
nice.
That's a good method, man. That way, like nobody feels like put out. Really.
Yeah. So yeah, we did The Substance, and I think the time before that was the new Beetlejuice movie.
Oh, okay. Both aren't bad.
Yeah, but it is. I immediately went to like, if you have a bunch of girls and they're all voting, you're going to get Beetlejuice and The Substance.
Yeah. Which was, both had their moments. Like, I mean, Tim Burton definitely ripped off Peter Jackson's Dead Alive for Baby Beetle, But I enjoyed it. I thought I got a good laugh from that.
I'm having to look up what Boxer's Omen is.
Yeah. So, man, I'd just like to thank all of the people in the chats that came by, like James, Doomcloud, Concentrate, EPHK was in here, Jen Rich was here, Chase was here. Who else was up in here? Paul was in the chats quite a bit, asking some questions. So, thanks to everyone. Mr. Ben, Live the Line actually hopped in and said hi. So, thanks to everyone who hopped in. You got Sleepy Reader. So thanks to everyone who tuned in. Showing Brandon the love. I mean,
yeah, really appreciate it.
You have your fan base, man. So
yeah, and I saw someone was talking about the I'll butcher his name, the Felipe Andrade and Rom V book. Their Rare Flavors book was one of the the Live in Line guys and me just did a best of the year. We were talking about the best comics of the year, and for me, it was really up between Rare Flavors and Empowered, and I had to go with Empowered because I'm such a Adam Warren fan. But Rare Flavors was like my favorite monthly that was coming out this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Mini Deaths of Layla Starr. It's a really good book, really fun take on Eastern spiritualism. So yeah, I mean
that felt like a book that if Layla Starr was a new Vertigo book, then that would.
Yeah. I mean that gave hardcore Vertigo feels like. Vertigo dropped the crown to Image, but Image has kind of dropped that crown. I don't know who's going to pick it up with this Toy Factory and what's his name? Jeff Johns shit that they're pumping out at the moment. So we'll see who becomes the new tastemaker, the new Vertigo. Maybe Vertigo can pick it back up because like that crown is in limbo, but it is
because you have all these kind of like comic being a little more shattered and everywhere. You have like I always think of like you have Distillery and Mad Cave and all these places that feel like they're kind of just not Image, but at different places,
Yeah.
And so I do think there has to be like a different aesthetic because I think when Image had its Saga era, there was this like sex criminals Saga kind of Wicked Divine feeling of new comics, and as good as a lot of the new publishers seem to be, it feels like they haven't really established a feeling that doesn't just feel like it could be an Image book.
Right. Mm-hmm. And a lot of
aside from, of course, Live in the Lion and Cosmic Lion are doing it on a much smaller indie level, which I think is probably easier.
Mm-hmm. And then you got really weird small ones like Floating World has always put out some really fun stuff. Yeah.
They're doing Farrell's new book, and they have the Greg and Fake's Santos sisters.
Yeah, Silver Sprocket's not bad. I enjoy a lot of their stuff too. That's
they do Michael Sweater's stuff. They do some books that I think suck too, but it's they've got a variety of but they have a few interesting things going on over there as well. So and I shouldn't but I feel like my barrier is it's like if you're an indie publisher and it's not about like Image, I know too much about how they work, and I'm like there's certain things that Image does that I don't agree with the choices, but if I was in that position, I would probably make the same choices.
Mm-hmm.
Where like smaller press stuff, I'm just like, oh, you just have bad taste sometimes because there's no money.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I like some Silver Sparkle. Benji Nate's books at Silver Sparkle are really good too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is interesting to see where comics will go and what. Dark Horse has been an interesting place too because they've been doing like the Richard Corbin Den books, and Paranoid Gardens, and they have some cool stuff there. My one big critique of Den is they had a Patton Oswalt introduction for one. Which seems like an insane person to get for. It's like leave all the cast members of Blade Trinity out of Richard Corbin books.
I think it's because he's kind of a name at Dark Horse right now. He's got the Minor Threats,
and the Barfly.
Yeah, I'm just shit talking. I don't think it's probably sold more books anyway.
It's hit anyway. It hit with readers, so I think it's probably one of their better selling books over at Dark Horse. So it's selling for them, so they're writing it, right? So
yeah, you certainly can't knock that.
Cool, man. Well, thanks a lot for coming on, Brandon. We really appreciate it. I don't know if there's anything you want to plug before you head off, like your socials. You can plug your socials if they're probably already following you, but you never know.
Sure, yeah. I've got Instagram as Royal Brandon, and then I've got a Patreon that I try to do every week or two. And then the newsletter with me and Casey, it's Royal Salon, that you can all find through their Instagram. But yeah, thanks a lot for having me on, guys. It's a good talk.
Yeah, no problem. And if you guys haven't read Surviving on Mars yet, I highly recommend picking it up. It's a really, really interesting read. Not your typical Brandon Graham book, but definitely an intimate look into your life. You know what I mean? And I really appreciated reading it, man. I like that you put that out. So yeah, we'll be back tomorrow afternoon. We'll be talking to Joel Meadows, and we'll be talking to him about his Sherlock Holmes book that's right now on Kickstarter. But until tomorrow, we'll you guys stay classy. I'll go ahead, Brandon. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you.
No, I like Sherlock Holmes a lot, so I'm like, I like that. That's a cool thing to check out. I even watched all the Elementary series with Joan Watson, played by the lady from
Lucy Liu. Yeah,
Lucy Liu, that's it.
Yeah, Lucy Liu.
Yeah, with Johnny Lee Miller. He was probably my favorite TV. Like, I know a lot of people like Cumberbatch, but I kind of like how petulant and childlike that Johnny Lee Miller would get where he'd throw his little fits.
Oh yeah,
funner Holmes.
Elementary is a million times better than
the other one was just called. What was the other one called? Just called Sherlock, right?
Yeah, and it got really stupid. But the Elementary one is actually really solid.
Yeah.
All right, man. Take it easy, y'all. We'll see you guys later.
Yeah.